Hey guys, I'm Heidi Prieb. Welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. Today on this channel, we're talking about perfectionism. And this is part of the broader topic that we're exploring this month, which is self-esteem. And what we're going to go into today is how perfectionism often keeps us away from both a healthy sense of self-esteem and also deep, authentic connection with the people around us. We have a ton of stuff to pack into this video, so I'm going to get right into it. For the first half, we're going to go over how perfectionistic tendencies can create a self-fulfilling prophecy, where essentially, if you're telling yourself the story, people will only accept me or like me or want to be close to me if I am showing up perfectly, that thought process can actually become a vicious cycle where it starts feeling more and more as though that thing is the truth, but it's not. And then in the latter half of the video, we're going to go over what it looks like to have a really strong sense of internal perfectionism. So this idea that I will not accept me unless and until I am perfect, and how that belief tends to keep us away from having really meaningful and deeply fulfilling lives. So we're going to go over how to break both of these patterns and challenge our own thinking in these areas in order to get ourselves more of what we want out of our lives and less of what we don't want. And you might have both of the beliefs we're going to talk about today. You may have only one or the other, but I think it's highly likely that even if there's one you initially recognize yourself in, you probably have some element of the other as well. So I encourage you to watch both halves of this video just to see which one resonates a little bit more, or if these two are actually heavily impacting each other. So we're going to start with the interpersonal side of things. So this belief that I will only be accepted if I am perfect. So let's look at what happens when we go into a situation believing that this is the truth, that we will be rejected if we show any sign of weakness or imperfection in front of other people. So when we live with this belief, essentially the question we are asking ourselves in every scenario we enter into is, am I able to show up perfectly here? And if the answer is yes, in the rare scenario where, let's say, we believe that we have truly mastered a skill or worked so hard at it that we now feel relaxed when we are performing it, what happens is we give off a very easeful and congruent energy because we're not freaking out and trying to hide ourselves or trying to shield other people from seeing our true selves. We are going into a situation wanting to be seen because we believe that we have achieved perfection, or at the least something so close to perfection that whatever tiny mistakes we make, we believe others will forgive us for. So we show up to those situations with presence and dignity. And anytime we are showing up to a situation with presence and dignity, we are naturally giving off an energy that makes others comfortable, because we're essentially communicating to them through the way that we're behaving, hey, I'm okay. You don't have to worry about me. You don't have to provide me with self-esteem. I'm not trying to get anything out of you. I feel secure in how I am. And so you can just be you and I'll just be me. So showing up with that energy puts the people around you at ease. And when the people around us are at ease, they tend to respond quite favorably to us. And that brings you right back into that belief, I must be perfect to be liked. Because look at what happened when you went into something perfectly. People responded favorably to you. And of course, if you could do everything perfectly all of the time, this belief would be no problem. However, even the most perfectionistic people amongst us usually only feel like they're getting things perfectly right an incredibly small proportion of the time. So what happens the other 99.99% of the time in your life? What happens when you go into a situation and you ask yourself the question, can I do this perfectly? And the answer is no. Now you're probably going to pick one of two options. One is to retreat, so to go home, to withdraw, to isolate, and to keep trying to perfect that skill before you go back into a situation where you need to attempt to use it. Or if you can't avoid the situation, isolation and withdrawal is not an option, you might go into the situation with defensive and guarded energy. So you have that belief that if anybody sees the fact that I'm not currently perfect at this thing, they're going to judge me and they're going to reject me. So I need to be on high alert. I need to kind of push away any questions people have that might expose me as imperfect if I were to answer them honestly. And I need to find a way to throw people off the trail so that they don't see that I'm not perfect at this thing. Or we might just show up feeling super bad about ourselves and have this energy to us that we really need other people's validation, that it's okay to be where we are. But in any case, we're going to be showing up with really incongruent energy, where we're feeling one way but trying to act a different way. And when we're showing up with incongruent energy, other people tend to pick up on that. Even if they can't put a finger on why, they usually know there's something about the way that this person is holding themselves and the words that they're saying, or the kind of energy that they're giving off and the words that they're saying, that don't quite match up. When we have that incongruent, mismatched energy, it tends to make people feel uncomfortable in our presence. And when people are uncomfortable in our presence, we tend to have a harder time connecting with them. Because if we're being inauthentic, it's hard to authentically connect with someone else. What happens is, once again, it goes right back into reinforcing that belief that I need to be perfect in order to be accepted. Because we are misattributing our lack of acceptance from other people to the fact that we weren't doing something perfectly, as opposed to what it might actually have been, which is that we were not behaving in a way that was congruent and authentic. And that tends to turn people off. Of course, this will not be true in all scenarios, but I find that it is true in so many more scenarios than most of us realize, particularly those of us who are perfectionistic realize. It is unbelievable. Because the thing that most of us don't realize, especially most of us who grew up with more perfectionistic patterning, is that people are not attracted to other people's perfection. If people are attracted to other people's perfection, it's probably just because they are also wounded in a way that leads them to believe that they need to be perfect and they need to be with another person who is perfect in order to be universally admired by people, because that's what they know love to be. But people who actually have more secure patterning and who are more grounded in what feels meaningful in life understand that all humans are imperfect, including themselves. So, people who are able to display their vulnerabilities and the things that they're struggling with, and who can signal the areas in which they need help, as well as can stand strong in the areas where they do have natural aptitudes, that combination of traits becomes very attractive because it's signaling, hey, I'm human, and so I'm not going to expect you to be not human. And we can co-regulate around both our strengths and our weaknesses. So we're going to take a look at that cycle we just did with perfectionism, and we're going to run it through a more secure belief system. So if we have that belief that others are attracted to my presence and my humanity, so my authenticity, now what happens when we go into a situation and ask ourselves the question, can I do this perfectly, is that it's a much simpler cycle. Just like the perfectionist, the secure person who asks themselves, can I do this perfectly? In the rare scenario where the answer feels like a yes or pretty close to a yes, they show up with presence and dignity. They're honest about their strengths, and they have no trouble showing other people where they shine. And because they're present and authentic in those moments, they tend to make others feel comfortable, which increases the likelihood of connection with people. But what's interesting is that the exact same thing happens on the other side of this chart. So when the more secure-leaning person asks themselves, can I do this perfectly? And the answer is no. What happens next is they show up with presence and dignity. So they're able to admit what they're struggling with or what they're not great at yet, and they don't need other people to either savior them from that scenario, so to be strong enough on their behalf that they don't need to develop that skill, nor do they need people to see them as perfect. So it's okay for them to just admit, I want to do this thing, I want to get better at it, but I'm just not there yet. Here's where I actually am. And they can kind of commiserate with people over their challenges and struggles and things that they aren't getting right yet. And because they're able to stay in their sense of dignity and stay present through that process, once again, they're making others feel comfortable. because they're behaving congruently. They're not pretending to be anywhere other than where they're at, and they're not pretending to be feeling anything other than exactly what they're feeling. And so again, there's a much higher likelihood that connection is going to happen, which reroutes directly back to that original belief. Others are attracted to my presence and humanity. And this isn't to say it's always going to be true, right? There might be a subset of people who are absolutely turned off by the fact that a secure person feels comfortable with themselves. But that's going to be a much smaller percentage of people than those who believe that people have to be perfect in order to accept them. So in this model, there's going to be a much greater percentage of people who you're able to connect with under these circumstances than there is in the first model. I'll say it one more time, very simply and plainly before we move on. People do not form deep, pervasive connections with each other over mutual perfections. Around people who we perceive to be perfect, what we tend to feel like is intimidated and inhibited, or desperate for validation. And neither of those things are the basis of deep connection. The basis of deep connection is I see you and can hold you in the entirety of your humanity, and you see me and can hold me in the entirety of mine. So if those are the types of relationships we want, ones that actually have lasting power, we have to drop this idea that we get there by behaving perfectly. What we are actually doing if we are refusing to show up in any way other than perfectly is we are driving away all of the secure people, which might be the total opposite of what we think we want. Now, we're going to go into the second half of the video, which is about how we get in our own way when it comes to the drive for perfection. What I'm going to make a very clear distinction around here is the difference between perfectionism and excellence. So excellence might mean that you are doing something really well, that you've developed a truly exceptional skill in some area. And what I'm going to argue here is that excellence and perfection are often at odds with each other. So often when we are chasing perfection, we are actually sabotaging our own chances at achieving excellence. And the reason for that is because the opposite of perfectionism is not failure, okay? The opposite of perfectionism is the attunement to reality. When we are focused on achieving perfection, what we are doing is spending all of our mental real estate attuning to an ideal. So imagining what we want to be true, imagining every nitty-gritty idea of what would be perfectly in place if the thing that we desperately want to be true were happening. And we are spending all of our time rotating around and examining that ideal. And what we are not doing when we are spending all of that time attuned to our ideal is attuning to reality. So looking at where we actually are in life, what skills we actually have, which opportunities are available to us right now within the life that we are living, and we're not taking the realistic chances for growth and development that are available to us at the level we are currently at. And it is precisely the art of being attuned to our environment, being realistic in our self-appraisal, and figuring out which skills we can build based on where we're starting from that lay down the groundwork for achieving excellence later on. Because every step of the way, we're doing a reality check. We're checking, does this goal actually fit in with my other priorities and values? So if I want this thing out of my work, as I'm working towards it and as I'm taking steps up that ladder, am I feeling more satisfied with the overall quality of my life? Or is this actually interfering with things like my close relationships or my health or other things that really matter to me? So along the way, we're doing constant checks to make sure that what we think we want is in practice, in reality, what we actually want and what actually improves the quality of our lives. Versus when we are so attuned to the ideal of something, we're not doing that checking en route. We're just telling ourselves the story when I get there and I finally allow myself to be present, because we cannot be attuned to an ideal and present at the same time. When I get there and I'm present, everything will feel perfect. And I don't think I need to tell any of us how much that sets oneself up for disaster. when we actually get to that place and allow ourselves to settle into presence for the first time in a very long time, especially if we've allowed a lot of the stuff that keeps our lives feeling meaningful fall to the wayside in pursuit of that ideal. That moment of coming into presence is going to be a very harsh one in that case. So, what we're going to go over next is 5 questions you can ask yourself to figure out what you're really trying to achieve out of your perfectionism, and if there's a way to do it differently that could bring you way more meaning, contentment, and satisfaction en route. So, the first question I recommend asking yourself is, which base level skills are really important for achieving the kind of life that I want that I am completely ignoring? So, this is essentially the act of figuring out where your blind spots are. So, I'll give an example of this. The other day, I saw this reel on Instagram that I thought was such a perfect example of this, where there's this really buff, really fit guy lifting weights. And the voiceover was fairly sarcastically saying, "The reason you don't have love is because your muscles aren't big enough. It's not your terrible personality. It's not your lack of any discernible goals in life. It's not because you have no idea how to talk to women. It's because your muscles aren't big enough. Just keep lifting." And I thought that that was such a perfect example of how perfectionistic patterning can keep us completely and totally off track when it comes to what would actually get us what we want in life. Because I find that something that's frequently happening when we get really obsessed with doing one thing perfectly is that we are expecting that one thing to be able to compensate for all of the other skills we would actually need to develop to achieve what we want to achieve that are more threatening for us to look at. So we're putting way, way, way too much weight on one area and totally neglecting skills that would take us much further. So a really good way to check ourselves on this is to ask ourselves, who has the thing I want despite not being perfect at the thing that I'm telling myself I need to be perfect at in order to get that thing? So if you have, to use that very clear example, that belief that you have to have a perfect body to be in a happy relationship, ask yourself, who can I think of who does not have a perfect body, but who's still in a happy relationship? And which skills do they have that I lack? Is it possible that that points to something very fundamental that I am lacking because it's easier to just focus on getting bigger muscles or losing 20 pounds or whatever it is? Is it possible that actually the reason I'm not in love or in the perfect relationship is because I don't really know how to show my vulnerabilities? And so I don't know how to connect with people in a holistic way. And is it possible that that person I'm looking at with the imperfect body does, in fact, know how to connect with people in that way? Is it possible that's a much bigger reason why that person is in a happy relationship and I'm not? What might I be ignoring that is actually very fundamental here? So, if we're really serious about figuring this out, it might not hurt to ask the people around us, hey, here's this thing I've been trying to achieve for a really long time. Do you have ideas about why I'm not achieving this goal? Can you point me to any areas I might need to work on that might be a blind spot for me? And this is an incredibly vulnerable thing to ask, right? So we want to make sure we're going to people who we trust. But the idea here is that generally we're going to focus on the things that are not shame-bound for us, and we're going to naturally neglect the things that are shame-bound for us. And if you don't know what I mean when I say that term, I will put a link in the description of this video to another one I have that goes over what it looks like to have a shame-bound emotion or part of your personality. But this is an important point because I find that perfectionism is often a distraction from that which is shame-bound within us. Again, if I think that my vulnerabilities are disgusting and despicable, and it doesn't even occur to me that that could be the thing that actually draws someone closer to me, I'm going to get really obsessed with some other area that I think it's perfectly healthy and even admirable for me to work on, and I'm going to convince myself that that is the only thing I need to do. I just need to get richer or fitter or whatever it is, because I think that there's nothing shameful about being rich and fit. But I do think that there's something shameful about being vulnerable or having interpersonal needs. And those might be the things that actually connect me to other people. You need to be willing to look at where your blind spots are and do some work in those areas. Next question to ask yourself that naturally follows out of this one. What would I have to grieve if I were to give up my attachment to this ideal? So often when we have that attachment to an ideal that we call perfectionism, what we actually have is a fantasy that we could achieve X without Y. I could have the perfect relationship without ever being vulnerable. Or I could have the perfect relationship without ever feeling lonely or misunderstood or anxious because I don't want to have to learn the skills for tolerating any of those emotions, which I need to learn the skills for if I want to have an excellent relationship. I could have the perfect job without ever making any mistakes or ever looking stupid or ever having to ask for help. And a kind of supplementary question to this one that you can ask yourself to really get to the core of it is, if I knew that I were never going to achieve perfection in this area, what would I feel? What fantasy would I be letting go of? And what grief would come up? So if I knew that for the rest of my life, my body was going to look the exact way that it looks right now, how would I feel? What fantasy would I have to grieve? Maybe the fantasy that getting the perfect body would mean that I was happy forever, or accepted by everybody forever, or never felt any shame again. If I knew for sure that my partner was never going to change, this is for those of us who are codependent, what would I have to mourn? Maybe I would have to mourn the fantasy that I am this God who is capable of fixing other people's trauma and pain. If my status in life were never going to change, I was never going to become richer than I am right now, what fantasy would you have to mourn? Is there a salvation fantasy you're holding on to about what being admired by other people would mean about the quality of your character? You cannot achieve your way out of any of the most basic human experiences and feelings that are inherent to living. And often when we start letting go of our obsession with perfection and ideals, what happens is we have to mourn the fact that we are human beings and we cannot escape our humanity and all of the hard feelings that are consistently a part of it, no matter how badly we want to. Which brings us to the third question. What would it look like for me to show up congruently at the level I am currently at? So if I were not trying to cover up or hide any of my imperfections, but I were actually trying to live in a way that is honest and authentic and display my imperfections and ask for things like feedback and help, what would that look like? What parts of me would the people around me see that they normally don't see? What would I know about me that I currently don't know, or that I currently try to keep my head in the sand about? What would I no longer be denying about my own needs, my own desires, and my own skills? The cool thing about this is that the more congruently we show up in the world and the more honestly we display ourselves to other people, the more we expedite our own growth and development. Because now that we've accepted where we're at, it means we are open to the lessons that are available to us at the level we're playing at. Being willing to admit both what we don't know yet, what we're not good at yet, and how we feel about that allows us the best possible chance at actually developing the skills that we need to move forward in the areas of life that matter to us. And so very quickly, we start to master these incredibly basic skills that we may have been missing for the entirety of our lives because we were keeping them shame-bound. So really spending some time with that question. In what ways am I not showing up authentically, honestly, and congruently in my life? And what would my life look like if I did? Is a really important question to spend some time with. The next question I want to encourage you to ask yourself, and this is one of my favorite questions of all time, is what do I wholeheartedly, with my entire self, enjoy progressing towards? So when I am picking my goals, what I often ask myself is, if I died halfway to achieving this goal, would I die happy and content with how I spent my time pursuing this goal? So if I'm thinking of something that it's going to take me 5 years to achieve, and I die 2.5 years in, would I have genuinely and wholeheartedly loved the last 2 years of my life? Would I have felt present and engaged and inspired en route to this goal, to the point where it doesn't actually matter to me all that much on a deep level whether I ever get there? If the answer is no, you are going to want to either change your goal or change your approach to that goal. So if I do think that I genuinely want something, but I hate working towards it, is there a way I could find using creative thinking to work towards this thing so that I authentically love and stay present inside of the process? Often the answer is yes. And if the answer is no, there is no way for you to enjoy that process, is it possible you have picked the wrong goal? This question is kind of encouraging ourselves to boil our lives down to the fundamentals of what feels meaningful to us on a day-to-day basis. And when we are living from a place where we are regularly engaging with the fundamental aspects of what makes a life feel meaningful for us, we generally do not have to dissociate that much into fantasies about a perfect future, because the life that we're actually living feels fulfilling while we're living it. So it feels better to be present than it does to be somewhere else in our minds imagining a different life. And this bleeds very naturally into the last question I want to propose or put on the table today, which is, if there were no perfection in this one area or in life in general, if I knew that there was never going to be a way to get the perfect relationship, the perfect career, the perfect body, the perfect personality, which imperfections would I most enjoy spending my time on? So this question is inspired by Mark Manson, who's a self-help author who I grew up reading quite a bit of. And one of the biggest takeaways I ever got away from his work was that to lead a good life, you have to focus not on the big, shiny, perfect things you want, but on which problems you enjoy having. Because that is the reality of life. Most of our life is going to be spent just trying to solve problems. And if we love the problems that we are trying to solve, we don't actually have to get them solved in order for us to have a really meaningful and satisfying life. So where a lot of us go wrong when we're striving for perfection is we're assuming that the options are being in a horrible mess that we hate or achieving perfection. And so we create scenarios where that's true because we're not striving for what's in between, which is engaging with problems that we enjoy. So if I knew that I was never going to get the perfect job that made me happy forever, or the perfect relationship that never had any problems, or the perfect body that everybody else coveted forever, what would I want to spend my time on anyway? What exercise do I just genuinely enjoy doing enough that it doesn't matter if it ever leads to the perfect body? That's the exercise that's actually going to keep you reasonably healthy and in shape for your entire life. What work do I genuinely enjoy doing, even if it doesn't get the type of recognition that I want it to get? That's the work that's genuinely going to feel fulfilling for you for the rest of your life. What kind of person do I enjoy being with so much that I don't mind if we sometimes fight or really get frustrated with each other? That's the kind of person you're probably going to be happy with for the rest of your life. So this is an area where I had a lot of perfectionistic tendencies earlier on in my life. I thought that having the perfect relationship meant that two people could perfect their communication skills enough that nothing ever went wrong, and there was never any fighting or drama or arguing. So I remember the first time I got into a romantic relationship after having done a lot of work on my attachment stuff. And I met someone else who had also done a ton of work on their attachment stuff. And I kind of thought to myself, great, we are never going to have a stupid argument or a petty conflict, because to be securely attached means that none of that stuff ever happens again. And I'm sure you can imagine my surprise the first time we had our first absolutely stupid and immature fight. And I remember feeling so frustrated and going, this was not supposed to happen in this relationship. When people are secure, it's supposed to mean that you never have an argument that is anything other than perfectly mature, and where everybody is anything other than perfectly regulated the whole time. And it definitely means that I'm never supposed to have that feeling of, well, maybe we should just break up. And so what I did was I went right back into my perfectionistic ideal And I went, I'm going to learn everything that I may possibly have done wrong here in terms of communication, and I'm going to get perfect at it. So I went out and bought all of the books that John Gottman, who's regarded as kind of the leading expert in relationship communication, had ever written, and I started going through them. And I still vividly remember the experience of walking down the street, listening to John Gottman's book, The 7 Principles of Making a Marriage Work, on Audible, and coming across a part of the book where he talks about the fact that in his research, he's found that the people who have the most satisfaction long-term in their partnerships are not the couples who fight with the best communication skills or who fight the least. They are the couples who like each other the most. They genuinely and authentically love the relationship enough that they do not need it to be perfect. And I still sometimes honestly look back on that moment in my life and realize that it was the first time I think I ever actually understood in my body what romantic love was. That it had to be this place where there was room for all of this imperfection, and not like sexy imperfection. Not the type of imperfection it feels fun to deal with. The type of imperfection it does not feel fun to deal with, but that you love someone enough to be willing to deal with and grow together through anyway. And of course, with all of this, with work, with relationships, with our connections to ourselves and the bodies that we live in, there are going to be things that are deal breakers. So there are, of course, types of conflict that we want to stay away from. There are certain ways of treating our body that are probably always going to bring us misery. And there are career paths we could go down that are probably consistently going to result in misery for us. But the idea is that in order to figure out which path feels mostly right and which path feels mostly wrong, we have to be attuned to reality and to our lives as they actually are. Things feeling really wrong in the present moment is going to alert us to the fact that maybe we're not going down the right path. And things feeling really right in the present moment, on the other side of this, might indicate that we have some desires or some wants in our life that we maybe haven't been fully conscious of. So maybe we have goals that would be so wildly fulfilling, we couldn't even imagine them from where we're standing right now, because we haven't been attuned enough to the present to actually pick up on what's going to feel fulfilling to us en route. So again, at the end of the day, what we really want to focus in on here is, are my goals and are my ideas of what I'm heading towards in life enriching my life in the present moment, the moment that I am currently in? Or is it taking away from the present moment and making me feel deadened inside of my life? Because when we have chosen the right things to strive for in life, the things that are actually going to allow us to achieve excellence and self-actualize in very authentic ways, even the hard moments feel meaningful. Even in the middle of the worst fights with a partner who we actually deeply love, we are going to be learning something important and valuable about ourselves and our ability to be in relationship. Even in the worst days at a job that we love, we are going to be gaining skills that make us stronger and smarter and savvier people. Even in the hardest moments of our lives, in whatever capacity we're showing up to them, if we have chosen meaningful and aligned pursuits for ourselves, we are going to be growing inside of those challenges. So we want to be paying deep attention to whether or not the goals that we have chosen are enlivening us and growing us, or if they are deadening us and depleting us in the present. And this is how we move away from a model of perfectionism and towards a model of deep meaning. All right, this has been a lot of information and a lot to chew on. So I am going to leave things here for today. As always, let me know what you guys are thinking, feeling, any questions you have as you go through this video. As always, I love you guys. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and each other. And I will see you back here again really soon.